Well, my claim to fame is what you guys call a pipe, we call it a whistle. Comes out of a Captain Crunch whistle box. If you hold up one of the holes like this and blow it, that's 2600 hertz tone. That 2600 hertz tone is what controls the AT&T American telephone system. And it was developed way back in the 50s. And we'll figure out how to work this thing. And how it all got started. Well, it got started from this, really. I was basically testing an FM transmitter, and some blind kid turned me on to phone freaking. And what is a phone freak? Well, when you're blind, the only thing that you really value is what you hear, not what you see. And as a result, they can hear things that we can't hear. And I learned about the phone company system and the switching tones, and I got a Captain Crunch whistle from one of the kids. And with this, you want to dial a number, you call up a 555-1212 information number, which is free, and then you blow it like this. And that just basically is the same thing as hanging up. You're hanging up on a trunk level, and you go a little ka-chink sound, and then if you want to dial 2, you go 1, 3, and you dial a number. And that was basically how you make free phone calls. And Joe Ingressia did this in the early 60s, and I remember reading about him in the newspapers. And so I built a prototype of a blue box at home. I couldn't believe it. It worked. My parents thought I'd gone stark raving mad. Here I was going back and forth between the piano and the blue box, getting the frequencies correct. And you can do just about anything with a blue box you can do as an operator. And you can call other operators, you can call routing codes, you can tap phone lines, you can route calls all over the world by you just knowing what the routing codes are. And you can stack tandems. And this is a little example. I'd like to play maybe 2 minutes of this. And this is a recording that Evan Doorbell made back in the early 70s. It's an old American dial tone before touch tones. And he's just dialing with a rotary dial some number. And as you can see, it's an old mechanical switching system. And it will be narrated by Doorbell.
The number that's ringing at this point doesn't matter. What's important is that this call has gone over a trunk from New York to a distant 4A, which can be reset by 2600. That's the supervision handshake, off hook, on hook. And now it's waiting for new digits, which Ben will supply.
Those tones you hear are the blue box tones.
216-054-064. These are old routing codes. The network of the 1970s had routing codes for tandems in all major cities. The first code, 216-054, is the routing code for Youngstown, Ohio. The 064 in the area code of 216 is the routing code for Canton, Ohio. Both of these are crossbar tandems. When Ben keys in this sequence, the 4A into which he is keying picks up a trunk to Youngstown, Ohio, and sends 064. That tick is the 4A cutting through to Youngstown, Ohio after having sent 064. Now, what does Youngstown do with the 064? Well, it picks up a trunk to Canton. That's the code for Canton. But having been sent only the routing code and no digits to follow it, it simply dumps us into the Canton trunk without sending anything. In other words, it stacks. That's the sound of Youngstown, Ohio dumping us into a trunk to Canton. And that's the handshake from Canton.
Notice
Canton,
you hear
Ohio
two
is
chirps.
now ready to receive digits.
Not this one.
That's 054064. This causes Canton to pick up a trunk to Youngstown and send 064. Now we're in Youngstown again, which stacks into Canton, and then Canton gives us the handshake. And we'll do another 054064. Now we're in Youngstown again. Youngstown stacks to Canton. That's the handshake, and here we go again.
We'll do one more.
Same digits. Youngstown, Canton, handshake. Now the connection has gotten so long that the handshake is all you can hear. Now on that supervision flash, you could really hear multiple links, both on the off-hook and the on-hook.
So there you have it. This is on it's actually wideweb.com. Phone Trips is where you get that tape, and it's called Classic Tandem Stacking. There's all kinds of other recordings that you can get on there. But with that technique, you can route calls all around the world. And so what happened basically at this point, the blind kids got a hold of somebody from Esquire magazine article. There was actually this guy, Don Ballinger, who got busted using blue boxes and got real bitter toward the phone company and wanted to blow the whistle on the phone company and let everybody know about it. And the phone freaks found out about it, and they contacted Don Ballinger, which is a bad mistake, and they told him about me. And then they wrote this Esquire magazine article called The Secrets of the Little Blue Box, October 1971 issue. And Steve Wozniak got a hold of the magazine and showed it to Jobs. And Steve says, "Let's build them and make them and sell them." So that's what they did. But he didn't know how to use them. So I did a radio show on KPFA Berkeley and demonstrating not unlike what you just heard. And it just turned out that Woz invited me over to the UC dorm in Berkeley, and I showed him how to use the blue box. Unfortunately, Woz is a digital person. He's not an analog person, which means that when you are an analog person, your waveforms are analog, which means nice and smooth. But when you're a digital person, your waves are square waves, nice and rough. When you send a square wave through a system that is not designed for that, you tend to be noticed. And that's basically how I got busted. I got busted because somebody was using Woz's blue box system to make calls. Phone company detected it, and the person had my phone number and abused my privilege and wrote my phone number down, and that was how I got busted. Otherwise, I would have been pretty safe even today, because I was very careful. As many years went on, Woz his car broke down one time. He was stuck in the East Bay, and he said, "Let's use the blue box and let's call for help about the car." And he did. Cop pulls up, right about the time he was using the blue box. And cop said, "What's that?" And Woz said, "Oh, it's just my music synthesizer." And cop looked at it a little bit and handed it back to Woz. Says, "A guy by the name of Moog beat you to it." And so he wanted me to show him how to call the Pope, because he wanted to call and confess. And he was going to impersonate Henry Kissinger. And speaking of impersonating people, about maybe 2 or 3 years later, I was scanning for 800 numbers and discovered a very interesting phone number. It was an 800 number that later I discovered it to be the White House CIA crisis hotline number. And there was a way to tap lines back then, so we sit in on the line and listen to it for a while, and it was on an unencrypted link. And somebody said, "Olympus, please." And the voice on the other end sounded remarkably like Nixon. So I wrote down Olympus. And 2 weeks later, I went to a party, and somebody wanted me to trade. Somebody had this really cool number. I wanted it. And phone freaks like to trade numbers. So I said, "I'll trade you a number. Would you like to have the CIA crisis hotline of the White House?" And he says, "You got what?" So I gave him the number. But before I even had a chance to give him the number, he'd already stacked two or three trunks in there calling the number. And he got him on the line, and he said, "Sir, we have a national crisis on our hands here. He says, what's the nature of the crisis? He says, sir, we're out of toilet paper. They hung up. First instance of punking the president. So I was helping Woz with the Apple II, and this is where I kind of designed the telephone interface board. But that was pretty much after I had my stint in jail. I made the most of the jail. I was sentenced to Lompoc Federal Prison, which is near Santa Barbara. It was a minimum security. It was almost like a summer camp. They had dorms and cubicles and things like that. And they had all the different factions of people, the blacks, the Hispanics, the white collars, and the gangsters. And I made friends with the biggest and meanest persons of every single group that I could find, and offered them all kinds of information that they found very, very useful about how to deal with the phone company, including how to make free phone calls, even when you could only make collect calls. And so I also figured out how to manipulate their walkie-talkie system, and built a jammer and a transmitter and a receiver, so we could receive their calls as well as jam them as well. So they didn't quite like that too well. So I finally got out. When I finally got out, I worked with Apple II and did the telephone interface board. And that kind of ends kind of the first section of my talk.